Hello everyone, this is Elonzo. Want to know how to get your first cloud job? Then please register for our webinar. We'll teach you everything that you need to know and answer your questions along the way. Hope to see you there. Hello everyone, this is Elonzo. Want to know how to get your first cloud job? Then please register for our webinar. We'll teach you everything that you need to know and answer your questions along the way. Hope to see you there.
My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family, I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired.
Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the GlowCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Mike Gibbs. I'm the founder and CEO of Go Cloud Careers, and I'm joined with Mark Milonovich, and he and I are going to help you build your technology career. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the CEO of Go Cloud Careers. I've been an architect now for over 25 years, cloud architect, enterprise architect, network architect, business architect, and I've been helping other people just like you get their first technology job, get their first cloud architect job, network engineer job, and I want to help you build your best career. I'm joined here by Mark, who's our Chief Technology Officer. He is a network architect with a strong background in technology. If there's anybody that you want to get geeky with in terms of networking, it's got to be Mark. So keep that in the back of your mind. He's a CCIA like me, but he's been hands-on tech for a long time, where I've been in the architecture side for, well, anyway, a couple of decades now. So bring us your questions to help you build your best career. And that's why we're here. We come online once, sometimes twice a week. This week it's twice a week, because I want you to have the best career. I don't want you to be like me starting out, where you buy training, and you learn all the wrong things. In the end, you've wasted 1 or 2 years of your time to get to your goals. And people come to us after buying courses, taking boot camps, spending years learning the wrong skills, because they didn't know the skills that were necessary for their career. And that's why we're here. So bring us your questions, because Mark and I really want to help. And we're here free, so please do so. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you about a couple things that I'm excited about. The Cloud Architect Career Development Program is now 3 years old. And in these 3 years, we have people working at Apple and Amazon and Cisco and Google and IBM and Microsoft and Accenture, Deloitte and KPMG and Capgemini and JP Morgan Chase and Barclays Bank and British Broadcasting Company and a whole host of other companies. And we're so excited about it. We're going to offer 50% off of everything site-wide this month. That means our award-winning Cloud Architect program, which is ranked #1 in online cloud computing programs in the world. It means our Enterprise Architect program, literally everything, so take advantage of it. I also want to tell you that tomorrow we have our completely free How to Get Your First Cloud Architect Job webinar. And this will be on Zoom. We will go over the Cloud Architect role, and I promise for 99% of you, you don't understand the role if you've taken a certification. And we can talk about how you go from certified to hired, or how you go from your last job to hired, or how you can transition careers. Just like the person who just got his first cloud security architect job just yesterday, who previously was not in tech. So we can talk about that as well. And while we're at it with the free stuff, we have a completely free How to Get Your First Cloud Architect Job guide. And in this guide, it will cover every last skill that you need to be an architect. I'm going to tell you, most of these skills are not actually tech skills. They are business skills, because we architects are experts at digital transformation. But we will cover the full list of business skills, executive skills, and tech skills, and it's all yours completely free. So just download it and take advantage of it. So bring us your questions so we can help you. I actually had a chance to speak to one of my first clients the other day from about 22 years ago when I first got him in his job. And he came to me as an associate sales engineer. And the next thing I know, he's a global account manager with a fantastic job. And he's worked for all the best companies in the world. I always love hearing back from my students from decades later to see how far they've come. So bring us your questions. For me, the passion is just watching people change lives. I remember when I started my tech career, I was kind of confused. I'd been a firefighter paramedic, which was a job that I liked. Then I went to school and learned how to practice internal medicine, which was another job that I liked. And then I found that I just loved tech. I mean, I literally loved it. And, when I transitioned to my first tech job, it was like the greatest thing that happened to me. And then I was fortunate enough, and I made the right decision. And I asked the VP of architecture, what do you want in the perfect architect? And he actually asked me, and I built an entire list. And I said, I'm going to master that list. And within 2 years, I was a principal architect. So I want to help you get to your goals. By comparison, we have Mark here, who's a tech expert, and he's also coached and helped many others throughout the years. He likes to focus a little more on the tech than I do, but he's still an architect. So you can get both perspectives. Mark, why don't you welcome everyone while we wait for their questions?
Everyone, I'm really excited to be here. As a matter of fact, I was going to point out, every single time I see the introduction to our live sessions, I hear the students' success. It really gets me amped up, because it sees all the hard work, all the effort we put into being in class, being for free here on YouTube, answering questions are really paying off. Now, as Mike mentioned, we have two different perspectives, right? In the end, we all come back to the business aspect of things, how we apply technology to certain business requirements. But I always enjoyed the tech. And that doesn't mean that I'm biased in a sense that you need to buy, let's say, Cisco, or you need to buy Juniper, or so, whatever it may be. But I feel quite comfortable with it. I take enjoyment in many different things. Many times me and Mike reminisce about the tech. Sometimes we talk about how certifications are a tool, a framework. We get excited about that. How some certifications are undervalued when it comes to the brand, even though the knowledge you can gain from it when perfectly applied is fantastic, especially something like we just talked about the other day, Mike, if you recall, the CompTIA.
Yeah.
For example, fantastic knowledge, undervalued in the market. So a little different perspectives from that angle, but in either way, we're always excited to be able to discuss technology, discuss how it applies to the business, the architecture side, and also kind of try to figure out why is it that people believe that architecture is supposed to be techie compared to the view that we take that it's more business orientated. So if you have any questions, be sure to ask them. We'll give you both of our perspectives. Sometimes they might vary, sometimes they'll be the same. In either case, we do hope that you're going to glean something from it. There we go, our first question. And again, I apologize, I'm not sometimes very good with pronouncing names. Bhavika Manchi asks, is it possible to transition from IT auditor role to cloud security space?
So absolutely. So first I'll tell you where I transferred in, internal medicine. That was my job before my first tech job. And the answer is you can do any job that you desire, literally anyone. Yesterday, I had someone, he was a student of mine, and he applied to be an IT security analyst. It's going to be his first tech job ever. And when he applied for that IT security analyst job, they said, you know, this is a little bit beneath you. I think you should apply for a cloud security architect job. So as he was applying for the cloud security architect job, they said, I think there's a bigger role for you. And he ended up as a security architect for a very, very huge organization. And the answer is, of course you can. So, Bhavika, I'd like to tell you that nobody was born practicing medicine as a physician, nobody was born an attorney, and nobody was born an airplane pilot. We go to school for this. The answer is yes, you can. But honestly, it has absolutely zero to do with what your background is with regards to your future. It's the actions you take today that will determine where you go tomorrow. If you want to go strong, get stronger, I recommend you lift weights. Now, the kind of weightlifting is based upon the kind of strength you need or your sport. But if you want to run faster, you run. But I'll give you some examples of people that got great jobs through training. So I will tell you Arun S. Arun came to us from India. He was working at Home Depot in a non-tech job. We trained him and got him his first job as a cloud architect sitting over there at TELUS, which is a huge phone company in Canada. I'll pick the next three people because people tell me architect jobs are hard to get, which is not true at all. We'll talk about Coyote. We can talk about Ivan Tamba and Jordan Kitko, three college students that we got hired at AWS as a solution architect as their first job. So there's there. Now let's talk about cloud security. Delroy Batt was working on ambulances as an emergency medical technician, which is not exactly an IT auditor role. His first job was a cloud security architect at CDW. So it really doesn't matter your background at all. It really doesn't. It matters what your goal is and the actions you take today. That's really the secret. I used to practice medicine before I went into networking, and I didn't start out with an admin role. I didn't start out with a help desk role. I went straight into a senior engineering role and was a lead architect within 6 months. So that's really the secret, is you can do anything you want. Which one? Anything. What would you like to do? But Bhavika, I'd like to give you some guidance on the cloud security space. We need to find out what you want to do in terms of cloud security. Do you want to be a cloud security architect? And if so, that's one path. And that's a path where you're going to need to learn presentation skills and sales skills and executive presence and CXO relevancy and understand finance and be able to quantify the financial impact of a problem in order to be able to create a return on investment capital model on a solution. Do you want to be the engineer that builds out the designs that the architects like me design? In which case, then you need hands-on skills with your next generation firewalls, IDS, IPS systems, VPN concentrators, cloud native security tools, etc. Or do you want to be a penetration tester breaking into the cloud to advise people on how to secure their systems? And if so, then you would need training in, say, you would need training in social engineering. You would need training in Kali Linux tools. Then you would need training in scripting, for example, and buffer overflow attacks and SQL injection attacks, because you're going to be breaking into systems. So the answer is, of course. Bhavika, I'd like to tell you that today is the next day of the rest of your life, and you can do anything. There is literally nothing you can't do. Nothing. As long as you get the right training and you put the right focus and you learn the right things. And that's why we're here, because so many people have been misinformed. You know, Jermaine Houston, he was selling landscaping gear, but now he's working as an enterprise architect as his first job. Daniel Bosa was selling shoes. I believe he was selling shoes at Nordstrom before JP Morgan Chase hired him after our training as a cloud architect. And, you know, Lenny Burnett was a video editor before Arrow Citrix, which is Arrow Electronics, the Arrow Electronics part of Citrix hired him. You can do anything. There's nothing holding you back other than our own constructs and our minds. So this is a great career. Please ask more questions. I would love to help you.
Yeah, I think one of the problems, Mike, and I don't know if you'll agree with that, is that other people try to keep us down. They try to limit our belief in what we can accomplish. But so many times, and you know, we've experienced this firsthand, there's people coming from different cultures, backgrounds, and they've had jobs that they're being told they have nothing to do with either being an engineer, being an architect. It doesn't matter if it's cloud, security, if it's enterprise. They're being told it's not possible, that's not it. But then they start looking a little closer at themselves, at what they've done. They try to dissect the skill set that they already have. And all of a sudden, they find out, hey, listen, I have sold things. Well, as an architect, on the business side, I need sales skills. If I have sales skills, that also means I've had to somehow practice the art of persuasion, right? Because you have to persuade the other person that what you're trying to sell them is going to be to their benefit and they want to get it from you because of X, Y, and Z. So many people are deceived not realize that they have so many transferable skills already from their previous experience that transitioning is just going to be a matter of learning perhaps that additional 20% of the skills that might be, let's say, more tech related than what they had before. And I've also experienced this many times when I've talked to engineers that have tried to move up. I've asked them, well, you already know the tech. Isn't that a transferable skill? You've learned how to document things. I mean, so a certain amount of writing. You had to be on troubleshooting calls. Well, doesn't that mean you had to be able to communicate effectively? You had to do that. It says if you're on change windows at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, then you have to plan for that. Then you have to plan out your configuration, test it. That's all part of organization and planning. Those are transferable skills. The difference, though, is now where do you apply those skills? At least that's been my experience.
Yes. Completely agree, Mark.
All right, next question we have from Taylor, I hope I'm pronouncing it correct, C. I am a principal cybersecurity analyst, and I frequently write controls and have to present in audits. What do you suggest I do to help me pivot into solutions architecture?
So Taylor, say a couple of things. I have a completely free guide for you on how to get your first cloud architect job. I would like you to download it, and I would like you to read it. And I would also like to invite you tomorrow to our How to Get Your First Cloud Architect Job webinar. And we'll talk about cloud architect roles, solution architect roles. And solution architecture is honestly just a mini version of cloud architecture. Let me tell you what a cloud architect versus solution architect. I'm a cloud architect. And by that, some company comes to me and they say, Mike, help me design my systems to be best. And I design them a hybrid cloud because they get better performance at lower cost in the data center for things that work there. I put them on AWS, I put them out for maybe infrastructure, I put them on Azure for artificial intelligence, and I put them on Google for disaster recovery. That's a cloud security, or that's a cloud architect who's basically working with everyone. All a solution architect is, I only work for AWS and I design AWS stuff. Or I work for Cisco and I only design, present, and sell Cisco stuff. So you really want to be more of a cloud architect or an enterprise architect than a solution architect. And here's the reason why. 98% of all organizations use more than one cloud. So now let's talk about how do you get there. You have to understand right now you're writing controls. And the architect world is completely different. Here's what we do. We're going to ask the client about their business. And we need to understand their business and understand it well, because every technology selection we make will impact their business in some way, shape, or form. It'll impact the business processes. The first thing you need to do is learn business. How do you do that? You could take a course like ours, or you could do what I did, which is go and get an MBA. Because if you don't understand business, you'll never be able to design a solution that's going to improve business. And that's the reason 70% of all architectures are complete disasters and 50% of all cloud architectures are complete disasters. But you can do it. You've already got a great background. It's just learning things. The next thing is the presentations you're going to be giving. You're not going to be giving presentations to the techie audience. You will, but I bet you know how to do that from what you're already doing. The presentations that matter are going to be to the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, the CISO, and you're going to be doing them constantly all day. Why? Because when you design an architecture, somebody has to buy that architecture. And who's the people that can pay for it? The C-suite. So you're going to be there. So you're going to need to know something called CXO relevancy. Again, you won't get that in an MBA program, but I took some training after the MBA program, but it's covered in ours. So make sure you learn some CXO relevancy. The next thing you need to learn is sales. Because you're going to design an architecture and you're going to go present it to the client. And if they don't say, yes, I want to buy it, the architecture dies. And meaning it doesn't move forward. It's just PowerPointware. So there's going to be there. Now, your presentation skills, good that you're doing them, fantastic. Make sure they're up to snuff, because the last part of a cloud architect interview or a solution architect interview is going to be a presentation. So you're going to have to get real good here. Now, you're also going to need to work on your executive presence. I'll give you an example. Hi, my name's Mike. I'm a cloud architect. If I do that, you're not going to take me seriously. But if I say, hi, my name's Mike, and I'm a cloud architect, and you learn how to take up time and space, it'll get you there. I had an executive coach help with me. I said, plus, about $20,000 of presentation skills training, and it got me there. Now, it's all about your design systems. And as an architect, you're not going to be doing anything related to analysis. Well, you will be doing analysis, but not analyst work, but definite analysis. You're going to have to think about the gaps that a security organization has. The biggest gap is the people. What kind of training do the people need? Do they need anti-phishing campaigns? Do they need anti-social engineering campaigns? You're going to have to figure these things out. And of course, with the right training, you'll know what questions. You're going to think about, what does their end-to-end encryption strategy need to look like? What are their demilitarized zones need to look like? What are they going to be doing? Are they going to be using a defense in depth, zero trust, or combination, which most organizations are going to use a combination, because both approaches, zero trust and defense in depth by themselves, are going to fail. Neither one's good enough. You're going to have to be looking at what kind of endpoint protection the systems need to have. What kind of hardening do the servers need? What kind of services are you going to disable? What kind of patches are going to need to be there? What kind of anti-malware? What kind of host-based IDS IPS system? Then you're going to have to get pretty good at knowledge of understanding the IDS IPS systems, the next generation firewalls, your DDoS protection kind of things. These are security architect skills. Now, we don't build it, Taylor. We're not going to go and configure a firewall. I kind of miss those days. It's kind of fun in my youth as an engineer, but I've been an architect now for decades, and we don't touch the technology. You're going to have to learn how to build the business case. You'll have to learn how to respond to RFIs, RFPs, RFQs. No, we teach all these skills. And then you will have a job that you love. This is literally the greatest job ever. While other people are in the back configuring this stuff in, coming at 2 o'clock in the morning, being stressed, not us. We architects, we're giving a presentation. We're taking a client to dinner. We're playing golf with our clients, because we've got to develop relationships with the clients to truly learn about their business and have the deep enough relationships to build a business case, because we've got access to the information, and then go sell that solution. Boy, this is a really good job. And I really think it would be great. And I love that you have a background. That'll make it easier for you. But I'll give you a secret. You have to change your thinking from focusing on what's in front of you to focusing on the big picture. This is one of the hardest problems that I deal with when I deal with engineers and other technology professionals who want to become architects. We're used to focusing on what's in front of us, and now you got to take a step back and you got to look for everything. So let me show you the mindset shift from an engineer to an architect, or an analyst to an architect. And I'm going to use 2 graphics, and I want to show you the difference between the engineer who's zoomed in and the architect who needs to be zoomed out. Now, I actually do a lot of photography, but I took these 2 photos with my phone, so bear with them. They're not exactly the best photos in the world. In this particular case, I'm going to show you the view of the engineer. Let's say I was an engineer, or I was a veterinarian, or a squirrel podiatrist, or what have you. You see how closely I am zooming in at that. Now, if I'm an engineer and I need to configure a firewall, I need to be looking at that thing that's directly in front of me, which in this case is the squirrel. That's the firewall. Everything looks good here, right, everyone? Squirrel looks cute. My grass is relatively green in my backyard. Everything looks okay. But let me show you what's really going on here. And this is why the architect can't be touching the technology, and they need to be zoomed out. Here's what's really going on in my backyard. Now, before we were zoomed in and all you could see was that squirrel. Here's the reality. See that beautiful little girl with the pointy little ears and the tail? That's my cat, Cindy. And my cat, Cindy, was in our patio and she was thinking about how to eat that squirrel. Now, that engineer needs to focus on that squirrel or that firewall, whatever's in front of them. But as an architect, we need to see that big picture. And then that way, when we're not touching the tech and we're far enough away and we've got that high-level bird's eye view, we can see the real danger here, which is my cat, Cindy. Now, I've been begging my cat, Cindy, to not eat squirrels and rats and lizards, but she just doesn't listen to me. No matter how hard I try, she constantly wants to hunt these things. And I've been begging her, please leave the animals alone. I mean, I buy her fresh shrimp, fresh scallops, and tuna every single day of the week, but I can't stop her.
The best tuna, don't forget that. The very best tuna.
Oh, that's true. It has to be one kind of tuna, and it has to be a certain shade and a certain smell. I mean, she's a little picky, but she's my daughter, so I love her and I take care of her. But that's the thing to remember. To do that, and you'll have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful option. So join us in the free webinar tomorrow. Not only will we tell you the role, go over all the skills, but guess what? It'll be on Zoom, so we can have an actual dialogue if you want. We can give you a mini interview, see where you're at, assess your goals, timelines, any of it. So join us tomorrow, and please download that free guide. My team popped both of those links for you in the chat box.
And I want to add, and I know Mike,
please, Mark.
Mike's done this years and years ago. I still teeter on the line because I've always kind of teetered on the line of engineering and architecture. It's just been kind of my role over the years. It's not going to come necessarily easy all the time to be able to change your mindset, especially let's say that you are naturally a person who enjoys the details. And if you enjoy the detail, now having to separate yourself from that to be able to take in more of a view of things, it could be challenging. So it's going to take effort at times to be able to accomplish that, especially as an analyst, right? When you have to look at that. So just keep that in mind. If it doesn't come necessarily easy the first time, keep trying. You'll find enjoyment in being able to zoom in and out, take a different perspective, especially if you can keep yourself, if you can learn how to do it efficiently. So that's just my take on it. But don't ever give up if it doesn't come as easy or as quickly as it does for some. Look at this. We got a question from Simon here. It says, how to decide which vendors to engage with, such as a cloud, mentions Nutanix, AWS, Azure, security, and then it mentions Fortinet, Palo Alto, and Spark, and the infrastructure side of the F, basically load balancing, NetApp, and networking when it comes to circuits such as AT&T and Comcast. So how would we decide vendor engagement and such things when it comes to all these various aspects?
And that's a great question. But the first thing is you're already too deep into the tech.
Yep.
If you're thinking this, you're missing the point. And I mean this in a respectful way, so let's talk about it. The first thing we need to understand is the business goals. And what is the vision for the business of the future? What does that business want to be now, 6 months from now, 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and 20 years from now? And if you're dealing with the CEO of a big company, they're already thinking 20 years forward. And why am I mentioning that? Because the technology you choose will affect that for the next 20 years. Next thing, Simon, we need to evaluate the business processes. And what does that mean? How does the organization work? How does it make money? How is the product delivered? How is the supply chain running? How is the supply chain orchestrated? How is customer service done? What kind of manufacturing exists? Where are the factories? How do inputs? So we've got to understand that. And then, and only then, can we work with a client to say, based upon your business vision, here's how we would like the business to operate in the future. Here's a prospective new sales process. Here's a prospective new manufacturing process. Here's a prospective new supply chain. Do you like that? And then when we've got a buy-in that says yes, then we can start thinking about how do we get them there. And that's when we start bringing in various vendors. And then we look at it and we look at the performance. For example, if I need maximum performance, lowest latency, I'm not going to go to the cloud. I'm going to build it directly in the data center, because in my data center, I've got much greater performance. I can put a 19 million IOPS RAID card in my server, and get blazing fast performance on a mission critical database. On the cloud, max what I get, 250,000 IOPS, which is nothing on AWS's fastest IO2. In the data second, I have, sub-millisecond latency between my servers and my switch. On the cloud, I'm going to have multiple milliseconds of latency. So we have to determine what we need and when we need it. And then we need to think about the requirements. So, better performance, lower cost, greater security in my data center, but I lack scalability in the cloud. So now let's talk about the clouds. Which one do we use? Well, where do you buy your eggs from? Which supermarket? Hopefully the one that gives you the best price, because they're just eggs. And then we've got to go start working with the cloud providers and negotiate with them and use them to negotiate against each other to get our best price. Unless there is a cloud provider that does something better. Let's say we wanted to use pre-made artificial intelligence. Microsoft by far is the most advanced in artificial intelligence in the cloud world. So we might use Microsoft for our AI. AWS has some of the biggest infrastructure in the world, and we might use them there. Google's been trying real hard on AI. They were market leaders in AI for a while, but Microsoft easily surpassed them. So we've got to think about that. And then, Simon, we've got to look about the strengths and weaknesses of each one. If we go with AWS because they're the biggest cloud and it fails, that chief information officer is probably not going to get fired because he or she did what everyone does. Now that chief information officer puts it in the Google cloud versus the AWS cloud, and AWS has got greater market share, and now it doesn't work. The first thing that chief information officer is going to be considering is, and his manager is going to consider, you made a mistake, you went to the Google cloud, and often they'll get fired, which is why they often go with the bigger, more dominant provider in the first place. So then we have to deal with the political reasons of what we're doing and why we're doing them. And a lot of that is all business. And then we have to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses. Checkpoint firewalls are pretty awesome. Cisco firewalls are pretty awesome. Palo Alto firewalls are pretty awesome. Fortinet firewalls are also pretty awesome. But given our use case, given our technology selection, given the way our people work, that's when we can start thinking about what we need. So we can't get to the tech until we've evaluated the business. And this is why it takes me 700 hours to get people trained and get a good cloud architect job, because it's not something simple. The worst thing that ever happened to architecture careers were these AWS solution architect certifications that have nothing to do with solution architecture and everything to do with system implementation. In fact, my good friend David Lithicum, made a really good video on why companies are leaving the cloud. He made another video about it today, and he and I had a discussion about it a week ago. We should soon have it on our YouTube channel. And it's because people went to the cloud without thinking. They went to the cloud because they got a certification that said the cloud's cheaper. Look, we have to evaluate all choices. Being an architect's like being a doctor. And in my old life, when I used to practice internal medicine and someone would come in and they had, say, high blood pressure, I might say, well, if I give this drug, say an ACE inhibitor, it will work good on their blood pressure and it will protect their kidneys because they're a diabetic, but it's going to make them cough. And if they have asthma and I make them cough, look, it's going to make that worse. So maybe don't give that ACE inhibitor. Let's go with a beta blocker instead. No, they have asthma. Let's skip that beta blocker. Maybe we'll go with a thiazide diuretic. And the way in medicine we have to choose these things is identically the same way we have in architecture. Do I use a router versus a switch? Do I use a layer 3 switch? On that switch, do I put a firewall module in the switch to do the firewalling on there? Or do I put the firewall in front of the switch? Every decision we make will help one thing and hurt something else. And architecture is like a living thing. The way I learned architecture was by learning how to practice medicine, because it's the same job. So that's how we do it. Simon, it's a great career, but you have to evaluate all trade-offs, and that's really what we're talking about. Mark can give you an example from the networking world.
Yeah, it's quite a loaded question, I would say, to say the least. But definitely, number one is always going to be the business requirements. You can never, ever make any type of recommendations. As a matter of fact, you can't even start your research unless you know what are the business requirements, which also include the constraints besides money. And then you can look at some of the technical requirements. For example, is cloud even an option? Well, that depends on type of security. What are we protecting? Then next, you're going to look at, and I'm going to now give you a little bit more of the design/engineering side of it, is on the operations side, on the support side. How can I recommend Nutanix if the people have absolutely no operational experience with Nutanix? I might not be able to consider that. Now I need multi-cloud, so I'm hoping at least AWS and Azure, maybe Google GCP, something like that, maybe Oracle. From that perspective, same on the security side. You can implement wonderful procedures, but what if I pick, let's say, a Cisco product, but the people that are in this organization have absolutely no idea how to deal with an ASA firewall or firepower threat defense, but they're more skilled on checkpoint. Now they might understand the underlying protocols and so forth, but is the company willing to spend money now on retraining them on a vendor-specific implementation? That could be another option. When it comes to the networking, number one, is AT&T, Comcast, they're just companies. They're going to have different services. AT&T in one area might just offer me a T3 connection, maybe even just a T1. Sometimes they might just offer me a direct Ethernet connection, Metro Ethernet. Comcast, on the flip side, might offer me some fiber to the premise, which I can in turn then use as maybe a direct connection into a colo location, into a shared location, which I can maybe build a direct connection into one of the cloud providers. On the flip side, I might be thinking, well, you know what? I don't even have AT&T in my area. I only have Verizon. What does Verizon have that I might be able to use? So that's just vendor looking. Now you got to look at the actual specifications. What type of applications is the customer going to be running? What type of latency requirements, bandwidth requirements, throughput requirements? So there's going to go a lot more information gathering first is going to come in hand before you can ever decide what type of vendor you're going to pick. And that, by the way, the last example, that's just circuit related, just kind of the connectivity. So there's a lot that goes into it. That's why these deals are generally not done in a month or two, right? They generally take quite a bit of time. And that's not us picking technology. That's not even business. As Mike mentioned on the business side, there's so much more that we got to consider. So definitely, I'm more skilled when it comes to the network architecture side. I've worked with many customers on that. Even that takes time. That's not as simple as that. If you're working for a company, I've worked for other companies before. They have specific solutions. You got to fit those solutions into it. So it can become quite complex. But I will put it this way: once you see the fruits of your labor, that's the exciting part where it comes in. But it's going to take time, research, definitely on that side. But always put the business first, so that you have a framework or something to start from. Great question, Simon.
You're very.
All right, another great. Let's take a look. So Simon asks again, as a trusted advisor, how can one navigate the diverse technologies and business values of different vendors to propose the most suitable solution for a client's needs?
Now, this is a career session, not a technical session, but I'm going to give it to you from the career perspective. You have to be able to understand the business problems and then think about a solution. And you have to be able to understand all trade-offs. It's exactly like medicine. The reason nurses who do the care, if they ever wanted to become a doctor or a nurse practitioner or prescribe, need to go to a special set of school, is it's a different way of thinking. What is in the best interest of your client? That is always the focus. What is in the best interest? Mark came to me and said, I want to be a cloud architect. I'd have to ask him, exactly what kind of architect do you want to be? Do you want to be on the high end where you earn the most, where you're focusing on digital transformation? Do you want to be a technical architect where you're really more of an engineer than an architect? Do you want to be an architect that focuses on cloud networking? Do you want to focus on cloud security? Because if we don't know that, everything that I give him will most likely be wrong. So first, it goes back to the goals. Now, let's say we're looking at the technology. We have to evaluate it. Let's take something like a server versus serverless. They all run on servers. When we deal with a server, we know we have the highest performance, far greater performance than serverless. There's no cold startup time. Now, on that server, we have complete control of it, complete control of the storage, which means we can guarantee the performance that we need. Can't do that on serverless. We own it, right? Which means we've got to take care of that server. We've got to look at the CPU and DRAM and disk IO utilization. We've got to look at that network utilization, and we have to capacity plan. And generally speaking, if it's used heavily, the server will be more cheap, will be much cheaper because we own it. Now let's look at serverless. It's not going to perform as well, and we know that. If it's used a lot, it's going to cost a lot more. And we know that. But what if the organization lacks the sophistication to manage that server? Now that serverless is looking awfully more attractive. Now let's say that business is in a transition state and they don't have a good staff and they're trying to do things. Now that serverless is looking good. Or let's say we've got an application and it's only going to run sporadically. And we can tolerate the low performance of that cold start. And it's only going to be invoked in an event-driven manner like once or twice a day. Now that serverless is a better option. So you can see we've got two options that each have different strengths and weaknesses, and we've got to figure out which is the right one for our unique needs. It's no different than if you determined if you were going to buy a car or use an Uber. Now, for me, I live in Florida. There's nothing that I go to that isn't 10 miles away. I wish that wasn't the case, but I got to jump on the I-95 highway for everything. So, I go to physical therapy 3 times a week. Ooh, that would be a lot of money on an Uber. I take my wife to dinner 3 times a week because I've got to make sure the wife is happy. Happy wife, happy life. Unhappy wife, oh, I don't want to live there. So I take my wife to dinner. Now, there's other things that I need to do. Now I'm driving every day, 2-3 times a day. It's cheaper to buy a Mercedes than it would be to actually use an Uber. But what if I drive 50 miles to a yoga class? Because that's the only place where my back is good. So you got to look at that in my use case. But what if I lived in New York City? What if I had to pay $500 a month to park my vehicle? And what if it took me an hour to get my vehicle out each day? Wouldn't a taxi or an Uber be good? Especially because I probably wouldn't be going more than a half a mile anyway. So it's a case like that. What is the use case? How are we using it? What are the needs? The business needs, the performance needs, and only then are we ever in a position to actually evaluate what we're doing.
Yeah, and I would like to add is you're never ever going to be able to check all the boxes. It just doesn't exist. No matter how much a vendor tries to sell you their solution is never perfect. It is designed by imperfect people that can't account for every use case. Me and Mike, we always discuss Windows. God bless Windows, as they say, but my goodness, Windows has to support so many things that it makes it a huge, attack vector. On top of that, there's such a wide compatibility that needs to have. It is not always designed for one specific thing. And the same with vendor solutions, right? They want to attract as many customers as possible. So they'll pick their niche, and then they'll try to solve those particular problems. But guess what? Company A is going to have slightly different needs than company B. So you're not going to be able to fit them 100%. So the biggest advice I can give there is, number one, again, always put the business first, but separate your bias, no matter how great it is, because we like bias as human people, but separate your bias from the technology.
Yep.
And see if that particular solution checks enough boxes of the actual pain points that the customer is trying to resolve. If you can manage that, it's going to become a little less overwhelming on trying to set before you a final list of vendors. Even if you have the choice of picking vendors, sometimes if you're locked in with working for a company, you only have so many choices to begin with. But again, narrow it down, do an elimination of what checks the most boxes, then hopefully with a little bit more research and trying to really see, will this be even a probable design that you can, or solution that you can recommend, then I would go with that. But again, it's going to be almost like a router doing switching. It's going to be hop by hop, right? It's going to be use case by use case.
Absolutely.
Great question, though. I love those questions.
Me too.
All right. Don't forget to post your questions in the box as well. If it's career questions, ask those. If they're technical, make sure you ask those as well. We're always here to answer them. We'll be glad to answer them. So do we have any further questions? Oh, welcome back, Folashaki. They say, are accounting terms such as an inventory turnover and return on equity, ROE, important considerations for an architect?
Absolutely, Folashaki. If we're working with a retailer and they need to increase their inventory turnover in order to optimize their business, we need to help them with the tools that will enable them to do so. That's where people go wrong. This architecture job is the best job in the world. It really is. It's incredible. We don't have to touch the tech. We're not like engineers coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning if there's something broken, but our job is to improve the business. And if you can't improve the business, you end up with where we have over 50% of all cloud architectures being total disasters. And McKinsey Consulting says actually 70% of technology projects are technology disasters. And here's the reason why. People focus on the tech, not the business. Now imagine my cat's tail wagging the cat instead of my cat wagging the tail. That's what happens when the tech drives the business. And I got to tell you, Folashaki, I've seen it for decades and decades, and we're really seeing it now on the cloud. So many people went to the cloud because they thought it was a good idea. They had a certification. And David Lithicum's his statistics that the cloud costs 2.5 times more. I think it's actually a little conservative. I think it costs even a little more than that, but he's pretty right, about 2.5 times more expensive on the cloud. Does that not mean we shouldn't be using the cloud? Absolutely not. The cloud's great. The cloud offers a level of scalability that's nowhere else in the world. It offers businesses a level of agility, and agility is worth paying a premium for. The problem was taking a virtual machine from the data center and moving it over to the virtual machine in the cloud was zero transformation whatsoever. It was just really a rehosting, but at 2.5 to 3 times the price. But moving the right workload to the right environment, now that's where the magic occurs. But you can't know what you're doing, and you can't plan what you're going to do unless you know business. So things like compound annual growth rate, yeah, matter. Things like EBITDA, sure, they matter. And net income matter, absolutely. To be able to analyze a balance sheet and be able to analyze a financial statement, critical. And guess what else we have to do? We may not touch the tech as architects, and believe me, you won't be allowed to if you work for a real architecture firm. But if you can't build an ROI model to show the organization how your technology project will optimize their business and more than pay for itself, it's dead in the water and it's gone. It's sad. I worked for a company in my youth, and they were all the best techies I've ever seen. We had a bunch of IIT graduates working for us, and the Indian Institute of Technology is by far the best tech company in the world. It makes some of these schools that pretend to be good tech schools in the US kind of look like kindergarten by comparison. And we had a tech that was so good. Our engineers were the best in the world. Our sales engineers, our architects, and they designed the best tech I've ever seen. And then Cisco would come in and talk about the business. Our tech people won every competition, and every time they would do a test or a proof of concept, and they lost nearly every deal. That's why I went to Cisco and learned the business, because this was like a mistake that I was at 20 some years ago being in a company like this. Cisco focused on the business, Cisco won. IBM focuses on the business, IBM wins. Who's the most valuable company in the world? Microsoft. You know what they focus on? The business. They're not out there in the techies of the world. They're focusing on the business. So yes, and this is a business job, and things like that are absolutely essential and critical. Good question, Folashaki.
I'll take it a step further. Who does want a great return on their investment? If it's time, it's time. If it's our effort, our effort. Most people start a business for what? They want to make money. Yes, sometimes there's some additional, giving involved. They want to bring a solution to the market that's going to solve a specific problem. There's all that. But who doesn't want to be able to invest money or the money of other people if you have stakeholders or shareholders now in the company, and then be able to come back and says, listen, your trust, the trust that you have put in us as a company, as a leadership, has paid off. We have returned so much on your investment, on your equity. Any which person would want to do. As an architect, from the business side again, that's one of your main jobs. You're there to make sure that you can increase that return on the equity on that investment, not decrease it with technology. You're supposed to make things more efficient, optimizing. So I would say it's of paramount importance when it comes to an architect job. And that's why we focus so much on the business side of things and less on the tech, because you'll need to know how to impact the bottom line of the company. Question from Aubrey Solomon. Hello, Mike. When delivering to clients, do you utilize templates or standards for organization? While TOGAF serves as our guide, how do we structure the information to ensure client comprehension?
Aubrey, a couple things. One is in many cases, we won't be using TOGAF. I happen to like the TOGAF framework because it's great for architects that have already been architects, that have already been trained to be architects, that know how to be architects, because it gives them a structured way of thinking. Start with the business vision. Now, long before I knew about TOGAF, I always started with the business vision. And the next phase of TOGAF was the business processes. I always focused on the business processes before I got to technology. So TOGAF is a framework that says, hey, look at the business vision first. And then when you're done looking at the business vision, look at the business processes. And when they're done, go to the data architecture. And then when you're done, go to the technology architecture. Look for opportunities and solutions, plan a governance, plan change management. So that's just an approach. But here's the thing, Aubrey. If you work with the federal government, you might be using the FIF standard framework. If you work with some enterprises, they may want you to put it in the Zachman framework. If you work for other organizations, they're going to put it in the Gartner framework. If you work for a consulting company, they're going to use their own framework. So there's usually going to be some templates. But here's the problem with templates. They work in some cases, and they don't work in other cases. So yes, I do use templates, but I am not going to look at the world like, the worst thing you could possibly do is you can look at one of these well-architected frameworks. And here's what the well-architected frameworks have a great strength, and they also have a big weakness. Here's their strength. The people that make these well-architected frameworks are experts at making their technology work, which is great. Here's the problem with the well-architected frameworks. They don't look at the business. They don't look at the business goals. They don't teach you where to start at the business. They're all about the technology. And they're all about a single vendor's technology, which you're never going to have in the real world. So anytime you got a framework, it's just a suggestion. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. How you structure the information is how it needs to be. If I'm structuring the information for an internet service provider like Verizon, it's going to be pretty darn sophisticated in how I structure it. I'm going to have something that I give for the C-suite, something else that I give to the decision maker of the management. And I could have an architecture document that took 50 people a year to write that's 800 pages long, and I'm guiding it along with a project manager. And in the top of it, we describe a high-level situation. And then in the situation, we could then have another document along with 50 pages of writing that talks about the wide area network, and another document that shows the point of presence locations in the architecture, and another document that's part of that sub-document that talks about the IGP routing, like OSPF or ISAIS. And I could have another part of that document that talks about the label switching or tag switching, and another part of that document is talking about the RSVP signaling, and all that's just related to the tech. So the answer is it's going to depend. It's going to depend on what we use. Whenever possible, I do like to use a template, and I do like to use a framework, but it's only as a guide. And here's the reason why. Yes, I learned how to practice internal medicine, but I spent more of my life in orthopedics. My wife, by comparison, she's a genius. She spent her whole life in internal medicine and cardiology. And why do I say this? She approaches every patient with the head, the eyes, nose, throat, neck, lungs, heart, etc. Now, because I come from orthopedics, I go from the big toe to the foot, to the ankle, to the knee, to the hip, to the lumbar spine, the thoracic spine, and then the neck. She's not wrong and I'm not right, and I'm not right and she's not wrong. Our goals are different, and therefore we do it. The point of these frameworks like TOGAF is to make sure we do it the same way each time, which might be the best thing in the world to do, and it may be the worst thing based upon your goals. But it's better to start from the head and then go to the toes than it is to forget stuff. And that's why you need to build these templates, and that's why you need to build these frameworks, but they need to be basically open, they need to be very flexible, and they need to be customizable, because no two customers are going to need the same thing. I promise you they're not, because they're in a different business. Leader 1 wants to go in this direction, leader 2 wants to go in this direction. Their technology better be different. If it's not, both of them are going to fail, or one of them is going to fail. So keep that in the back of your mind. So you have to structure it based upon the needs. And you're going to be structuring your information based upon the clientele. Who's your clientele? If you're working at Microsoft, your clientele is the end customer. If I'm working at JP Morgan Chase Bank, by comparison, my clientele might be the CIO of JP Morgan Chase Bank, or the CEO, or the other CIO, the Chief Investment Officer, not the Chief Information Officer, based upon the project that we're working on. Aubrey, I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to clarify it. I really want the best for you.
Fantastic. All right, Mike Welder. Question from Mohammed Banabila. They ask, the architect and design required to know the infrastructure. So in terms of cost, resilience, and security, so as a cloud architect, how do you implement it and discuss it with the customer?
So, I mean, Mohammed, for the first thing, we cloud architects don't implement anything. I design it, I present it, I sell it with the sales team, I help negotiate it. And as soon as it's time to build it or implement it, a new team comes in, a service delivery executive is going to manage the delivery, a project manager or project managers or program manager will manage the project, and a new team of engineers are going to come in to build it. And Mohammed, once they're done building it, guess what's going to happen? Then it's going to go to a maintenance team called sysops. And when it breaks, they're going to call another team called the tech or the technical assistance center or whatever's there that's going to make it. So lots of different teams supporting this. We must know the cost of building the infrastructure if we're going to sell it. Absolutely. And we're designing the resiliency and security, and we must convey what it is. So presenting an architecture with two different resiliency options, we're going to have to say, well, this architecture will cost you this, but this architecture can survive a cloud failure, internet service provider failure, and you're still up. This architecture costs you 30% less, but if the AWS cloud goes down, for example, you've got nothing. And maybe that's tolerable because maybe a minute of downtime for that business only costs $100. And if a minute of downtime costs $100, no big deal. But I've got customers that would lose $20 million a minute in terms of downtime. And if you try to build them a 4 nines available network, which means 5 hours and 15 minutes of downtime per year, that would be totally unacceptable. It'd be hundreds of millions of dollars that they would lose, potentially billions of dollars. So the business needs to design the actual need of resiliency and security. If I've got $3 billion of intellectual property, and I promise you OpenAI has more than that, they better have some seriously good security. And we're not just talking about the firewall security, which we need, the demilitarized zone security, which we need, the application security. But what happens when that AI starts giving out trade secrets if it's trained improperly and doesn't have security constraints? That could destroy a company like OpenAI in seconds. So we must always know the cost. We must always understand the performance implications. We must always understand how the technology will impact that business. We don't need to know how to implement it. And it's a different knowledge knowing how these things and knowing how to build. But that's what really we're talking about, Mohammed. It's always good to see you here from Somalia, Mohammed.
I'm going to add this, though.
I've always been wanting to go to those beaches one day.
Definitely. I'm going to add this, though, for you, Mohammed. The part about implementing is discussing with the customer. If you're leading a project, either as a project manager, as a technical solutions engineer, or architect, or just as a cloud architect, enterprise architect, whatever it might be, one of your tasks is going to be to put teams together. And when you put teams together, you're going to have teams that are part of the service delivery side. You're going to have most likely an account manager or customer service representative on your side. You're going to be able to pick your security engineer, your, in this case, might be cloud engineer or architect, depending on what level you're at, the network infrastructure engineer. And when it comes to the implementation side is you may come up with a solution, with a way of doing something that's going to solve a customer's problem. You may have to go to one of the engineers. That's why we do love our engineers and ask them, this is the idea I have. This is this particular design. Is this feasible from an actual operations and implementation perspective? And get their take on it. And that's something that you want to practice. Why? Because you're not going to always be sitting there and working on the tech. And the higher you go up in the architecture ladder anyway, you're not touching the tech. You'll need to understand how it works, but you're not implementing it. You're not building it. You're not building the BGP pairings. You're not building the interior gateway routing protocols with a full mesh, for example, or the hierarchy when it comes to these things. You're not going to have to worry about how the spanning tree necessarily does its convergence. You'll need to know what it is, but you're not going to be implementing it. For you, the commands are going to be relevant, but the engineer is going to know it. And he's going to let you know, is this feasible, the design that you have, yes or no? That's where it comes in, knowing who to talk to when it comes to the implementation. On the customer side, it may be that for certain matters, you'll have to go to the principal architect or the principal network engineer from that company. Other times, if we're not talking about software development, you'll have to go to that person who's in charge of that. You may have to talk to them. How are your applications optimized for the cloud? Are you looking to rebuild them? Yes or no? What are your latency requirements, bandwidth requirements, round trip time? So you're going to be going to specific people to get your questions answered. And those could be customers, they could be internal people, ever before you get to somebody in executive level. You got to the people in executive level when you're ready to present, sell the solution to them and what is ultimately going to be able to do for them. So that's just an example of where perhaps you might briefly have to consider how is it implemented. Hope that answered your question, Mohammed.
Great. I love that, Mark. Great question, Mohammed. Please feel free to ask your career questions if we want to do anything we can to assist you. Let's bring in the next one, Tyrone.
All right, from Kevin. Welcome, Kevin. Always nice to see you here. When recruiters keep contacting you and asking your experience for DevOps, do you just politely reject the architect role? I know what Mike would answer if somebody asked him that, but go ahead, Mike.
I'll give you an example. So it's about the way you're positioning yourself to some degree. Arun S., who came to us, he was working at Home Depot, and I'll give you a couple examples. He had a resume that was an absolute disaster. He had some kind of SysOps certification, an AWS DevOps certification, a developer associate or a certification on his resume. And I can remember Arun literally went on these interviews. DevOps, let's talk about your coding. And he said, Mike. And he said to me, why are people asking about tech? They're not describing it. And I said, Arun, can I dedicate this Thursday's class to fixing your resume? And he's like, all right, Mike, whatever you want to do. I got rid of his AWS DevOps certs. I got rid of his SysOps certs. I got rid of his development. And I focused it on the business things and wrote it where the business things were in context. He had multiple job offers within 3 weeks. Multiple. Ian Rowe in the UK went out there and all these people for our architect jobs kept giving him jobs that was hands-on DevOps. And Ian said to them, I'm an architect. I'm a systems designer. I'm here to optimize business performance. Come back to me with an architect job, not a DevOps job. Guess what? They came to him with Capgemini. Capgemini loved him, and Capgemini hired him. So you've got to be there. Look, I have people reaching out to me periodically and asking me if I want to be a network engineer for a bank. And it's like, thank you, but I gave up that career 25 years ago. But if you're interested in this, I could talk. So I love when recruiters reach out to me. Now, admittedly, I had to remove Cloud Architect from my resume. And I had to get rid of all these architect things on my LinkedIn profile because every time I made a LinkedIn post, I'd literally get 20 recruiters asking me if I wanted a job. And I couldn't run a business and deal with recruiters all day and being polite going back and forth. I love recruiters. They're there. So be very clear about your experience, be very clear on your branding, and be very clear on your messaging. From my experience, Kevin, we need to get you a little more depth still in the actual technology itself. We all learn at decent paces, but you are really smart, you are really motivated, and you have an extremely bright future. And I think when we can correct the knowledge in here and get it to where it's going to need to be, when people reach out to you, you'll be better able to position yourself because you have a strong and a very bright future. But that's really the key. People reach out to me for every kind of wacky thing all single day long. In fact, I get a connection request and interesting. Are you interested in buying this? Well, no. If you have to spam me with a LinkedIn message and an email, it's because your product isn't good and I don't want it. But, I'm not going to say that to them either. So be very polite. Tell them you're looking for an architecture role, not a DevOps role. Make it clear what you're looking to do. And then let them come to you with future opportunities when you're ready. And you're going to be just fine. But yeah, I get job recruiters coming to me for everything. And honestly, I'm grateful. Because it's always good to be wanted, and it's always good to know there's opportunities. I love it. People try to hire me to be a nurse practitioner, a network engineer. Somebody reached out to me for software engineering. I said, I don't know anything about writing code. Thank you for reaching out. I'm an architect. I design, present, and sell solutions. It actually turned into a conversation. They're like, what do you mean? And then I actually showed them what was in CIO magazine, and I showed them what actually the real company we're hiring for. And they're like, thank you. You just made my life a whole lot easier. So, Kevin, I'd like you to see the video that was made by Christina Marino and I that actually explained the recruiting process. Here's what we're talking about. So at the end, we've got 3 people in the recruiting environment. We have what's called sourcers. That's who you're dealing with. The people that know nothing about the jobs that are just spamming you, they're typically sourcers. They're kind of like the equivalent of inside sales, just trying to get you in there. And then we've got the recruiters themselves. These recruiters are combination salespeople / business executives / consultants. And they work with the company themselves. They understand the company and know how to position them. And then, of course, there's closers and negotiators that also help you with your salary. So make sure you're finding the right people. And while we're at it, Kevin, I'd like you to see the video that we released this Monday on why cloud architect job descriptions are so silly and why they come up with these goofy descriptions. And I'd also like you to, again, I know you know better, but look at that CIO Magazine article we talk about. And the reason they wrote that is because some of these job descriptions were silly. But if you got a person that doesn't understand the job, and then they come up with getting a cut and paste job description, which is silly, then they reach out to you, they don't know. But take those relationships, Kevin, nurture those relationships and harness them. And then when you're ready for the job and you've fully loaded with skills, you'll go in those interviews and they'll hire you because you're a really good guy and a very likable guy with a very bright future.
Just so you know, Kevin, Mike and I, we have this conversation quite frequently. And the thing that we agree upon is that there is a slight misrepresentation in the marketplace in regards to what really an architect role entails. Now, it is great that we have competition. You know, everybody's trying to make some money, feed their families. That's all fine. But a lot of recruiters, a lot of hiring managers, they go by what they're being told by billion-dollar companies, that an architect involves learning how to write Python code, how to write Terraform, how to do these DevOps things that half the times, I'll be honest with you, I don't know them because I'm not a programmer.
Right.
I don't plan on doing so. I'll be honest. Nothing against it. I've done it when I was in college so many years ago. Just wasn't my cup of tea. But that's not what an architect truly does. But because of the slight misalignment and the message that was put out there, and unfortunately, too, sometimes the way these certifications are phrased, it gives people really the wrong impression of what a specific role entails. And that's why we mentioned so many times architecture, we're discussing business, because that's really where the business focus is at. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have architects. Like for myself, I'm a bit more hands-on than Mike ever is going to be. Mike is more on the business side. I'm a little bit more on the tech. So you'll have to pick your poison. But when it comes to this fear, so when you're getting approached by these recruiters, just know it's not that they're trying to bug you. They're not trying to be coy with you. They're not trying to sell you on a job just for the sake of perhaps getting a paycheck. This is really what they were told. This is what the job is. They're being told that the architect role involves DevOps. So be polite when you speak to them. Keep a record of them. You never know when they might come in handy. Never burn your bridges. But just know that there is a slight misrepresentation in regards to what an architect truly is in the market.
Yeah, and actually, let me talk about that because Mark actually brought up a good point. Let's talk about the different architect roles for a minute and the salaries that go with them. At the bottom end of the pay scale, we have the most technical architects in the world, and they're called technical architects. They are experts on the tech. They focus on the tech. So if Mark was functioning as a technical architect in networking, and I was focusing as a cloud architect, I would ask a technical architect like Mark to go help me with my design. Now, that is the most technical role. These are your CCDE equivalent people, really smart. They're also the lowest paid because their focus is on the tech. If we move it up one level of extraction more, we've got our solution architect. And a solution architect is someone who works for a vendor and designs, presents, and sells that vendor solution. So if I was a solution architect, I'd still be reaching out to the technical architects like Mark when it came down to the technology. Now, the next step above that would be like your cloud architect, your multi-cloud architect, and they can't be quite as technical. Now, because you can't master all the different disparate systems of more devices, more security, private clouds, public clouds, hybrid clouds. Now, they're going to earn more because of that, because they're going to be closer to the business. But the closer you get to the business, the less focus you can have on the tech. And then we move up into the enterprise architect world, which is a business executive in every sense of the way. And we're dealing with some very big business executive salaries, and we're getting very far away from the tech. Now, that enterprise architect may have a cloud architect or two working for them, who then have a bunch of solution architects working for them, who then may have a bunch of technical architects and even engineers. And then we get into the chief architect world, which is kind of my world, where basically you're just a pure business executive. And then you've got enterprise architects, cloud architects, all these people helping you design the right solution. And there's no right or wrong place. I can tell you the closer you get to the business, you see a rocket ship effect in your salary. but there's more than life than just salary. You've got to be happy. I actually go back and forth. I like them all. You know, I prefer the enterprise architect role because it's most fun for me. I enjoy it the most. But you know what? Every once in a while, somebody approaches me with a really fun network architecture. And it's like, oh, that looks like fun. Let me be a little geeky. And, you know, Kevin, to put it in the context, I have a private cloud running in my house. I'm not joking because I like the tech so much. I've got 10 servers, 240 cores running in my private cloud. I also have a 10 gigabit Ethernet network through every single room of my home. And I've got redundant firewalls, and I'm running BGP to 2 different internet service providers because I like it. And it gives me a chance to have a little geekiness because I can't do it in my job. So hope that actually answers your question there, Kevin.
Yep. Great question, Kevin. Thank you again. All right. From Fola Shaki, in your experience, what's the hardest part of being an architect?
Honestly, Folashaki, I think the hardest part is now you're dealing into big white collar problems. Where you want to purchase your vacation home? Do you buy it in Palm Beach or Greece? And part of that's a joke, but the reality is I've been an engineer. Here's what my job as an architect was like. Go talk to people. Take them to dinner. Play golf with them. Go entertain them. And actually, that's probably the hardest thing, Folashaki. You know, there's a point where you're entertaining your clients and you're having 2 glasses of wine each night and a scotch or 2 with your clients. And it's like, I just don't want to drink tonight. And really, I just want to spend the night home with my wife. No, you may be at a Morton's or a Smith & Walensky or fine dining, but at some point you just want to stay home. So if anything, the amount of meetings that I would have would probably be the hardest part of being an architect. But here's the thing. I'd rather go meet Mark and have dinner with him than I would actually be staring behind a computer. So for me, Folashaki, I really hate sitting behind a desk. I mean, I honestly hate it. I've got multiple rooms in my house, one where I have a nice comfy leather chair where I can do some video streaming. I've got another room where I've got a desk because I don't like being behind a desk. For me, that is just the idea of torture, sitting behind a desk. And, you know, when I worked as an engineer for 6 months, and I got to tell you, they were the worst 6 months of my life, I was stuck behind a desk, staring at a screen all day long and typing. My back hurt, my neck hurt. I just didn't enjoy it. But it was a great job. It really was. I had a great manager. I was treated well. But to me, being an architect was like, I honestly used to say this to my wife every day. I used to thank my lucky stars and say, I can't believe people pay me for this job. Now, when I was a firefighter paramedic, I liked it, but I worked for a living, believe me. When I practiced internal medicine as a nurse practitioner, I liked it. I liked my patients. But when I would get home, I was tired. When I became an architect in my first enterprise architect role, here's literally what I did. I used to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'll tell you why I did it. I could do some documentation. And then I would typically, from 9 to 11, do some martial arts. And in those days, it was some Krav Maga. And then I would work, you know, I'd get home. I'd write some more documents. I'd deliver a presentation or 2 over Cisco WebEx. Then I would do more martial arts in the evening, and then I would go to the gym after martial arts. So that was like the best time of my life. But that's me. I needed that freedom. I much preferred to go visit a client at their site than commute to the office. That was me. But I think it's been the best and easiest job I've ever had. I honestly can't believe people pay you to be an architect. I think it's just fun. I like meeting people. I like giving presentations. I mean, I'm doing it right now. I just like going out there and talking to people and helping people. And to me, that's my dream. That was my goal, and that's why I love it so much. But we all love different things. I have a friend that's shy, hates talking to people, and loves being behind a desk and playing a video game. And he said, Mike, do you think the architectural role would be good for me? And I said, how do you feel about meeting people? I don't want to do that. How do you feel about giving a presentation? I don't want to do that. Mike, I don't think this is going to be a good role for you. Not that he couldn't do it. He'd be great at it, but he'd be miserable. So you got to do what you like. You just can't do what you don't like. I went to school for 7 years. Spent over $100,000 on an education to learn internal medicine. And in the end, I like tech more. And I literally transitioned straight out of healthcare to tech because it's what I love. I'm not saying I didn't like healthcare, but I didn't love it. I couldn't imagine spending, when I was less than 30 years old, the next 50 years of my life going to the same office, doing the same thing, day in and day out. It was just, I couldn't imagine it. I was telling my wife we got to build a retirement plan. Maybe we'll go to Greece where it's inexpensive and live in Greece. And she's like, what do you mean? You're 29 years old. I was like, I can't imagine doing this. So how do we retire in Greece by the time we're 45? Because and then I became an architect and I absolutely loved it. So I don't think there's any hard part of it, but that's me. But that's me. Mark's done the engineering, the architect part. More of his life has been as an engineer.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it depends on your disposition, really. It's like what Mike says. If you tend to not want to engage with people, being an architect is going to be torture.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to engage with people. And neither of us is saying that engaging with people is necessarily easy, that it's not taxing on you. Dealing with people can be difficult, can be taxing, it can make you tired. People have different problems in life. They can see through in the work. They have different attitudes, different upbringing. So that's the challenging part. But I'm going to give you this example now. This is a practical example. I've gone through this. I've done engineering. I've done the architecture. And when I worked for a different company, I was approached by an engineer. And they said, Mark, could you please come with me on this troubleshooting call? I asked them, why? You know more than me about this technology. Why do you need me? And they said, like, I think this customer is going to be angry. I don't feel like talking to them. I'm going to lose my cool.
Nope.
And it's just, I'm going to say things I'm going to regret. And you appear like you don't mind talking to them. I'm like, sure. Just give me an idea what's going on. Give me a little bit of history. Let's go in that meeting and I'll support you. See, this person, they cared more about the tinkering, making the technology work. It's not that they disliked the customer, but they didn't feel adequate, prepared. They didn't feel like they had adequate qualities to be able to deal with the pressure of trying to keep the customer on track, keeping the customer composed. What if the customer gets upset? How do you deal with them? So I didn't mind doing that. Did I always succeed? No, there's some customers, they just want to vent. They just want to vent. That's what it is. But we would help out each other. And we were also then on another troubleshooting call. He called me and again he said, I've been spending the last 3 days, 4 hours a day trying to work with this customer. They're driving me mad. I said, okay, let's go on. Then let's see what we can figure out. Basically, 4 eyes are usually better than 2.
Mm.
Little did I know, this actually came up to the director in the company I worked for. And they joined the call as well. And after about 15, 20 minutes into the call, they messaged me on the side and they said, Mark, is this your call? Why are you dealing with this? And I said, no, this isn't my call. I'm just here for support. Well, whose call is this? And I gave the person's name. And you got to understand, the director, he comes from the same mindset Mike does, right? They're a lot more business. They know some of the tech, but their idea is really customer experience.
Yeah.
And they write me back and says, why aren't they talking about the other engineer? Why isn't the other engineer talking? I said, because he needed the assistance, because we've been working through this for a few days. It seems like the customer needs a few more hands on deck, and we want to go above and beyond to be able to help the customer. So we're tag teaming in that in respect, but there are certain questions that, again, I need to get familiarized with them. So I asked them, but that's what I mean. It's really the disposition of a person. Do they feel like engaging? So much of the architect role, well, as you get even higher into certain engineering roles that are going to be borderline architect and solutions architect roles, is going to be dealing with people.
Yep.
If you don't want to deal with people, then that's not the role going to be for you. No. You're going to hate it. You're going to want to throw yourself in front of a bus. Don't do that. You're better off find a different position. Do something that you enjoy, because if you're going to do it for 8, 10 something hours a day, do something that you can bear, that you're going to find pleasure in. Don't torture yourself unnecessarily. That would be my advice.
Great advice, Mark.
All right. Remember to submit your questions and anything, career, tech, we're here to talk. Oh, Cloud Station, welcome back. Which job search procedure do you find most efficient between hiring a recruiter to job search for you or just by submitting applications randomly?
Okay, so Cloud Station, I don't submit applications. Me personally, I pick up my phone and I call Christina Marino. She's the wonderful tech recruiter that's actually on our YouTube channel a lot. I think I'd reach out to them at info@itexcel.com. She's terrific. But here's what I would do. And it all depends on where you're at in your career. After being an architect for several years now, I know a lot of chief information officers that I've consulted to and a lot of CEOs. So the first thing I would do is I would pick up my phone and I would call them and I would say, it's Mike Gibbs, I'm looking for a new role. And, they might even create a position for me because they've worked with me in the past. And it's near impossible to find a good architect and people are willing to hire them. But, I've got other students and, they're students of ours and they don't have this contact network. And I teach them how to go out there and build their brand. In fact, Alonzo spends a lot of time with our students on teaching them how to create the right kind of content, how to tune their LinkedIn profile, how and which post to interact with which people, which post to stay away from because they're going to be toxic to your brand and how to leverage that. Robert Welch was one of my students. He followed this. And I remember each day is like, Mike, I got between 10 and 20 interview requests every single day. Now, Robert was very picky on which job he took. And he ultimately took an incredible job, but it's there, but I see it every day. I can't even put cloud architect in my title or network architect or enterprise architect and make a LinkedIn post without getting offers. So what does that mean? It means if somebody's writing an article on some little silly thing that ChatGPT wrote for them, it's going to be ignored as the noise. If someone tries to write a bogus thing and that cloud computing is cheaper, it's going to be ignored and it's going to convince hiring managers stay away from this person they don't understand. If someone's going to say you can secure your systems by the AWS Security Center, that would terrify every single employer that's out there saying, oh my God, this person doesn't know, don't hire. By comparison, Cloud Station, if someone actually understood it and they could talk about, the benefits of zero trust, and there are some real benefits of zero trust, its strengths and its weaknesses, and then also create content on, defense in depth, what it does well, what it doesn't do well, how to integrate these two into a solution and how to potentially integrate artificial intelligence to be able to look at logs, be able to find things faster, and create a position paper on it. Now the world comes and looks for you. So I wrote a document. It was in 2000. It was on Introduction to IP Multicast. 20 years later, the company that I wrote it for, their competitors were actually using it troubleshooting. And as soon as I wrote that, I had about 15 job offers within a week. I was working for Riverstone Networks. I was literally traveling from internet service provider, internet service provider, internet service provider, meeting with their executives. And every executive I went to said, Mike, are you looking for a job? There's much better companies you could work for. Why don't you work for us? So what's out there is being seen as a leader, showing yourself as capable, and separating yourself from everyone else. When everybody else is trying to show their 15 certifications, which create bias, you show them why you can help them get to their goals. When everybody is saying, oh, I want a job, give me a job, you show what you can do for them. What is it you can do to help that client? See, when it comes to paying an employee, the company's doing it to get a return on their investment. If I pay this person $150,000, they've got to generate maybe $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a year in revenue. If they don't, we can't afford to hire them. So what are you doing to show your brand of what you can do? What are you doing to showing other people what you can do? And then you'll have the world find you. But no, I don't apply for jobs. Am I saying don't apply for jobs? No, I'm not. But here's the thing. If you don't have the perfect resume and you apply, you're just going to get auto-rejected. But if you've got a recruiter, and here's the process. Let's say Mark's now the director of IT. Mark kind of would be a great director of IT. He's techie enough to like it, and he's businessy enough. And here's the thing. I said, hi, Mark, it's Mike Gibbs. I'm the recruiter from ITXL. I always mention ITXL because Christina's organization is so good. And Mark says, hi, Mike. And I say, Mark, I'd like to talk to you about someone we're working with. His name is Cloud Station. Cloud Station's been through Go Cloud Careers' rigorous 700-hour training program. He's an expert in networking, data center, and cloud technologies. He works really hard. He's emotionally intelligent. He communicates well. He's got good leadership skills. Would you like to meet him?
Of course.
And he'd meet him. Now, here's the thing, Cloud Station. Mark's pre-biased to like you because I pre-sold you to you. And none of that happens ever if you apply for the job. So I'm not saying don't apply for the job. I'm saying really work your recruiters, really build your brand, really work your network, and then you'll be good to go.
Yeah, you're talking about most efficient, right? So most efficient is always going to be when you build it, they will come. That's the saying. So building your brand, building relationship, that is going to actually yield the most return on your investment, so to say. If you had to pick between hiring a recruiter or doing the application, unfortunately, again, this is my opinion only. This is somewhat of my bias, unfortunately. I think the entire hiring process is generally broken. It's just this. So submitting an application is going to be a numbers game. And can you get past certain filters because of what? Because how it is broken. So from that perspective, you can do it if you got the patience for it. Just don't take it personal. Don't let it bring you down. You're going to get many more rejections than ever any offers from the application. But a recruiter, if you find a really good recruiter, and that's where Mike hit the nail on the head, they can say things that you cannot say. For example, how many of us want to say on a resume, I'm great at communications? Well, when they read that resume, they're gonna look at it and ask, well, what does that mean? Show me. So you have to somehow demonstrate on that resume good communication skills. The recruiter, just like what Mike we just demonstrated there, they can say the words directly to that hiring manager without having to give them 3, 4, 5 different things that demonstrate your communication skills. He can just say, they have great communication skills. I think you should meet them. And they'll meet you. Now, on the interview, you'll still have to demonstrate it to a certain degree, but you don't have to figure out how to write that on a resume anymore. You're going to bypass those filters. So recruiter, if you have to pick between the two, find a good recruiter that you can build a relationship with, and they can build one with you, and they'll be able to place you in very good jobs.
Tyrone, we go to the next.
Next question from Folashaki. Is it a correct assumption to believe that public sector projects don't require the same amount of business knowledge as private sector projects, given the disparity in competition?
Folashaki, not at all. If you're going to go sell a $100 billion solution to a government agency, you're going to have to show them a return on investment capital model. Now, they won't be held accountable the same way they would be in real business if it doesn't work, but no, you're going to have to do the same thing. Folashaki, it's even more complicated in public sector environments because now you're dealing with politics and you're dealing with two sets of people from different backgrounds. You know, depending upon your level in architecture, you may actually be dealing with lobbyists to go lobby certain people to change the laws to make people want to adopt the architecture. But, and you'll definitely get there if you get into a high-level architect role. But no, public sector, private sector, nobody's buying tech because they like it. No one. You know, it's all about what can the tech do for the business. You know, when the government mandated electronic health records, I heard some of the leadership talk about a 30% savings by using them. Didn't provide any savings, but, you know, they were looking at the savings that were associated with electronic health records, assuming it could be cheaper, which is why they mandated them. They even gave businesses incentive money to go use them. But, you know, that's the thing. And not all assumptions are correct. That was very good information that they thought of based upon other similar businesses. It just didn't work for the healthcare business processes. Not that it wasn't a smart decision. It was a smart decision. But, you know, banking and healthcare, for example, may be different. What may work for a bank may not work for healthcare. But no, you're always going to be involved in business. Always, 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 always going to have to prove the business does something. Always going to have to prove the tech can help the business. Let's face it, nobody buys tech because they like it, except for us geeky people.
Yeah, I might. Well, who doesn't like opening up the box with the switch, right? And get that nice new switch smell and try to take the right.
Yeah.
No, I'm not a big rack and stack guy. Don't get me wrong, but it's still fun, right? You take the new toy out, and you try to figure it out, peel off the plastic.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, I was gonna say, to me, it never mattered what sector a customer was in, if the customer had 500 employees or if they had 10 employees, if they had a lack of competition or if they had a huge amount of competition. I always gave 110% of myself. That meant of tech knowledge, that one of business knowledge. If a customer put their trust in me, that I'm going to help them optimize their business. Optimizing the business just might mean helping them get a better utilization, let's say, of certain circuits. It might be as simple as that. Other times we needed to optimize the way the applications talk between systems, right? So if we're going a little bit more techie on that part, just because there weren't 50 other people trying to bid for the project didn't mean I give less of myself, less of my knowledge, less of my effort. So the same thing I always advise to everybody else. Whatever you do, give it your all, because you never know who they might be talking to. So you might get additional customers from that perspective, but also from the satisfaction of giving. We tend to have more joy from giving than we tend to receive. It's quite an odd kind of, how would I say it, not predicament. I can't think of the word, but inner workings of that once we give and we feel the satisfaction that we did something well, that we really helped somebody else out, that really makes us feel fantastic. And we can only do that if we give our best. So I would say never ever shy away from giving your all, giving 110%, irregardless of if there's competition or if there's a lack of competition. Never ever sell who you are and what you can do short. Great question.
Tyrone, we can bring in the next one.
From Valdez Brown. Do you find it difficult remembering the tech if you are not touching it hands-on? How do you stay on top of the technology?
Valdez Brown, I'm going to give you a secret. If you actually touch the tech, you probably won't understand how it works. And that's going to sound so counterintuitive. So I'm going to give you an answer. How often have you gone to your internet browser, like Apple Safari or Google Chrome? How often have you typed a URL or a web address in that browser? I bet you do it every day, right? But do you know what happens when under the hood when you don't do it? I'll give you an example. And Mark's the techie, so Mark can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not going to go through the entire process of the routing of DNS. I'm just going to I'm going to go how the TCP connection was set up. Now, I haven't touched the tech in 25 years, but I have to understand it. So let's say I want to go to www.gocloudcareers.com, and I enter that into my browser. As soon as that occurs, my router does a DNS lookup and says, what is the IP address of that website? Now, the next thing my PC does is it now knows the IP address of the website, and it looks in its routing table and it says, do I have a route to the website? And it doesn't have a route, but it has what's called the default gateway, which is a route where you go if you don't know where to go. So then my PC, because it's attached to Ethernet, does what's called an ARP, which is an address resolution protocol. It's a broadcast, and it says, who has the MAC address for that next router? And the router then my local router, my default gateway, will proxy ARP and say, I have that MAC address. Now my packet gets forwarded to that router. Now, as soon as my packet's on that router, the router does a look in its routing table. Do I have a route to that server? And if it doesn't, it will drop the packet. And if it does, it will then look in its routing table and say, which interface do I take? And assuming this is the interface, it'll then do an ARP who has the MAC address of that server. Now, it's probably going to go through 15 routers, but let's say we just did one here. Now, when we're on that router, that packet's on that router, the router will then do a lookup. Do I have a route to that server? And it's going to say, yes, I'm directly connected. Go out Ethernet port, gigabit Ethernet 0/0. So then the router will do ARP, who has the MAC address for that server. And the server will respond, and the packet will be forwarded to the server. Now, as soon as that packet's forwarded to the server, it'll send a TCP SYN to open a connection on that server. And that server will then respond to the SYN with an acknowledgement and then send a SYN or a synchronization back to the host that actually made the initial request. And then the host will acknowledge that and then send a SYN for a next data request. You've probably used a web browser your entire life, all hands-on, but never knew that. Because knowing architecture is how this stuff works, not how to actually configure it. And here's the thing, Valdez, when it's really part of your brain and it's really part of your mind, you will never forget it. We only forget the things that we don't truly know. You asked me which antibiotic for which microbe? I promise you I can answer it because I had to learn that because it was so critical so patients' lives don't die. Now, what will ultimately happen, Valdez Brown, is we will always understand how the stuff works. But as we move up and move more businessy, we become more dependent upon more specialists. Why?
Yep.
Because now that I'm focused more on the business, I can't focus as much on things changing. So I grew up with wide area networks that were private lines, they were VPNs, they were MPLS enabled VPNs, Martini tunnels, VPLS. I didn't get to work with software-defined networking or SASE, but Mark did, and Mark's an expert on it. So now, 20 years later, I'm in my architect role, and now I need an SD-WAN environment, and I call a network architect like Mark and say, Mark, help me out over here. So no, I don't have any difficulty remembering things because I learned it truly in the first place. But, you know, and that's the thing. When I work with a lot of great hands-on engineers, they know how to build. And they know it better than I ever will. They're really great at it. And I have deep respect and love for engineers. I really do. But knowing how to use a hammer or a nail or a screwdriver or how to write code doesn't teach someone how to actually design the building. So it's a different set of knowledge that you need, which is the same reason when I have engineers that have been engineers, it takes me 8 to 12 months to get them their first architect job. And it's the same reason when I get a nurse that comes to me, it takes me the same 8 to 12 months of an architect job because it's a different job. But Valdez, once you actually learn it, once you commit it to memory, and once it becomes part of you, you'll remember it forever. And that's the difference between true knowledge versus when we go to school and they shove a bunch of stuff down our throats and, you know, this mattered, so we remembered this, but the rest of it was meaningless. How about you, Mark? You've been in tech for a long time and you're a great architect.
So I will put it this way. Well, when we're talking architecture, right, we're talking about high level knowledge. So what do I mean with that? Mike spent a ridiculous amount of time hands-on and designing solutions when it comes to BGP. A whole lot more than I could ever dream of accomplishing. He spent over 10,000 hours on it. And even though he hasn't touched that particular technology hands-on, he hasn't gone into a CLI, he hasn't done a configuration, he will still remember the different states that BGP goes through, from the idle to the connect, to the active, to the open send, open confirm, and then eventually the established state. He will remember all those because of how many times he's discussed them. But for example, for me too, if you're teaching it, if you're implementing it, you're going to remember these things because you do them. So that's rote memorization. But as an architect, let's say just a general business architect, if I was to ask them, to Mike it matters because Mike knows it. But most architects, what good is it for them to know the details of those states or the retry timers on those particular states? For an architect that designs, it's not going to mean much.
Right.
But for an engineer who troubleshoots it, he's going to have to know more in detail, okay, if I'm in the active state, how did I get there? Why did I get there? What's the next state I can go to? You know, am I dealing with a TCP issue? Am I dealing with an actual BGP message issue? There's something going on with the update messages. Did I mess something up in the way that I'm advertising my capabilities? Okay, so a little bit more tech talk, but that's an engineer for you.
Yes.
An actual architect, he's going to have to know, all right, what type of BGP am I going to need if I'm trying to provide connectivity from my on-premise data center to my cloud environment? Is that going to be an external BGP or is that going to be an internal BGP? And what is the difference between them? Okay, so that's an architect, that's a designer. Those people are not going to care about the bits, right? They're not going to go into the protocol, into the actual packet capture. They're not going to look, is the transitive bit set or is it, you know, a mandatory field? It does not matter to them. You're not going into that type of detail. But I will put it this way to you. A lot of these technologies, they're interwoven. How they work, right? They're based on a foundation. As you work, what happens, our mind, it looks for association, it looks to build connections, right? So think of it like a puzzle. You start with one piece, you attach more pieces. Eventually, you build a fuller picture of things. Now, as you're trying to add more pieces, let me ask you this, is it going to be more difficult or easier?
And that's, Mark brought up something good. If your fundamentals are strong, and if you truly understand how the most critical things work, most things are just variations of the same new things.
Yep.
And that way, for example, if back in 1999, you learned how VMware invented the hypervisor and you truly understood it, then when AWS came up with an EC2 instance, or Google came up with a compute engine instance, or Azure came up with a virtual machine, or Oracle came up with a virtual machine, you know it was that same thing that VMware invented back in 1999. And for we architects that don't have to configure it, we don't need to know the commands anyway. So we just need to know how the stuff works. Same object storage that I worked with 20, 30 years ago is the same Microsoft Blob, AWS S3, Google Cloud Storage. It's the same stuff. It's just with a new name. And when you know that, then it's really, what are you buying? Bounty paper towels, the quicker picker upper, as my wife likes to buy, versus somebody else's brand paper towels. I don't know. It's all the same thing. So I don't think you'll have a hard time with about this. This is one of the best jobs ever. I encourage you to come into our field. I think you'll really love it.
Yeah. And final note on that, Valdez, just so you know, initially, so that makes sense to you, you may have to actually lab it up just to make sense of it. You might have to do that initially. But again, think about what your focus is going to be. Your focus is not going to be on remembering if you're going to have to type in this particular command. You're looking for the end result. How does this thing work? And that's what you want to focus on initially. And then over time, you're going to add to that puzzle these pieces, these association, and it's going to get easier, definitely with time. Question from Emperor Kiro. Thank you for the tips yesterday, but I wanted to clarify. How would a pen tester take his knowledge and transition into a security architect role? Would I need a business degree or a cloud certification?
Okay, so it's the same thing. You are a nurse and now you want to be a physician. You have to go to medical school. The good news of your knowledge of being a penetration tester is you have knowledge of the attack vectors that an organization has, which is a huge tactical advantage to you. But now you need to learn how to design the systems to protect it, which is the exact opposite of what you know. Say you're going to have to learn how to do them. You're going to have to get training in architecture from someone. How do you design those demilitarized zones? When do you design a honeypot versus not a honeypot? How and how do you design the end-to-end encryption strategy? What does that security policy need to look like? What does the organization's identity and access management strategy? Where do we use zero trust versus defense in depth? How do we combine them? What is the approach that we're going to take to server hardening in this organization? What kind of endpoint security do we need in this organization? What kind of training requirements do we need for the people? Where are the weaknesses in the people? So that is now your new world. And somebody's going to have to train you. Because, when you have construction workers that are good at building houses or hotels, and now they want to go design a hotel and sell it to Hilton, they have to go to school to be an architect. Now, the next thing that you need is you need the business knowledge. I don't care where you get the business knowledge. You can get an MBA, you can train with somebody like us, but you need the business knowledge. And what is that business knowledge? It's CXO relevancy. How do you relate to the CXO leader? It's sales. How do you go sell your solution? It's your presentation skills. How do you influence the customer to go buy your stuff? How do you present it in an executive briefing, which you'll be doing all the time? How do you present it in an industry conference, which you'll be doing all the time as an architect? Don't worry, their PR team will get you set up for doing it. You don't have to figure out how to do these things, but you have to give that presentation. How do you speak to the press? What do you say to the press? What do you not say to the press? Because I promise you as an architect, if you're long enough, you're going to be speaking to the press. How do you build the business case? How do you respond to that RFI, RFP, RFQ? How do you build the business case? Are you sensing a theme here? It's a completely different career. Now, let's say I decided that, I'm 50 years old now, and I want to spend the rest of my career as an airplane pilot. I have to go to flight school. I'd have to. So, that's what I would recommend. Now, good news. Tomorrow, we're going to have a How to Get Your First Cloud Job webinar, and you can be on this webinar. If you want, I can even give you a couple of questions and see if you can answer it like an architect or an engineer, because you've got a very strong background. But we have to remember, engineering and architecture are different. It's the same way where if I have a pharmacist with a PharmD, which is a doctorate in pharmacy, and then they want to practice medicine, they still have to go to medical school. And the thing is, they understand the drugs, but not the diagnosis, not the normal anatomy versus the abnormal anatomy, not where to inject the joint, not how to basically decompress a lung if they have a tension pneumothorax. It's a different set of skills. So it's about getting the right training for our career. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as an architect certification. I wish there was. We have TOGAF, which is assuming you're already an architect and you know how to be an architect, and you're hireable as an architect, it says here, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 in your architectures. We've got these certifications that are kind of all about engineering, which teach you nothing. Now, I will tell you the CISSP is a very good security architect certification, and I would recommend getting that for the following reasons. It will teach you about 10% of what you need to know for security architecture, which is a lot out of a certification. And AWS Advanced Security wouldn't even teach you 1%. So, getting 10% out of a CISSP, maybe 15% is good, but it will also get you respect, and it will also get you a good interview. And if you get a good interview and you've got those business skills and sales skills and presence, and you can win that interview, you'll get the job. And it's not based on your certifications. Delray Bad had 0 certifications before we got him his first cloud security architect job. Robert Welch, he had a cloud practitioner. It's not about certifications. In fact, I want to read you something that's really interesting. And this is written by my friend David Lithicum. It's written in the InfoWorld blog, and it pertains to security architects and cloud security architects. And I'm going to read it word for word. I'm not saying hard and fast requirements that cloud architects have these types of certifications. Indeed, if someone comes to me applying for an architect role and only has AWS certifications, or any specific cloud provider for that matter, I'm inclined not to hire them out of concern that a certification would translate into bias, which would corrupt the technology selection process. What's he referring to? If you took a CISSP, it's security in general, that looks good. But the second you take an AWS Advanced Security that doesn't focus on all the other things, it biases you towards AWS and AWS security. And if you're an engineer that's going to go configure these things, it's not a problem. And it's good for you to have these certifications as an engineer, because you're now going to know how to do it. But if you're the architect and you need to think about what is the technology and how does the technology work, not how to configure it, now you've got something that if it's an AWS certification, it's going to bias you for AWS. If it's an Azure certification, it's going to bias you for Azure. Here's the thing as architects, we can't have any bias. Imagine if a doctor came in and the doctor owned a lot of stock in Pfizer and only prescribed Pfizer medications and didn't think of Eli Lilly or Merck or Roche. We'd have so many patients that would die because they wouldn't have the best options for all the medications that exist. And that's where we really come from. It's the same problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this article into the chat box because I think it's really a good one.
Yeah, I would also add in the meantime, just when it comes to the certification aspect, and I'm going to stick to that. I still think the cloud certifications are in their infancy, especially in regards to what they're teaching. They're still in that phase where they're trying to advertise very much what their services are and their proprietary implementations of those. So if you think of security, as an architect, it really makes no difference to you what that vendor's web application firewall is, network firewall, because generally speaking is you can find or you have better solutions anyway, right? So I would definitely say unless it is a selling point, something that brands you well on your resume, if that's what you're looking to do, I would not even bother with most cloud certifications, unless maybe it's like the Google Professional Cloud, with AWS, at least professional. But again, it's mostly just to understand what they have and how they do it. That's it. Aside from that, they're going to just inundate you with marketing fluff. You're going to have to work on how to implement it. Again, that architect verbiage is a little misaligned at this time. That will get straightened out over time. You'll see it. They'll come around. They'll rebrand these type of certification. They'll bring up the quality of them as well. And you'll see that will increase to a certain degree. I think right about now, there's about 1 million, I think, AWS certified people over, right? Yeah. So that number is going to slightly be stagnant for a little until that retooling happens, because now with the repatriation of the cloud anyway, and they'll get better with their certification process anyway. So then you can use that more as a frame tool. But when it comes to architecture, unfortunately, there is nothing out there, like Mike says. It just doesn't exist because of the additional skill sets that you need, right? If we look at something as vendor neutral as it can be, when we look at, let's say, the Cisco Certified Design Network Expert certification, that is a design certification. even that does not have that amount of business intellect, business material that you require as an architect, but it's probably as close as you can get to something like that at this time. So wait a little bit. But as Mike mentioned, we do have pretty good training, a little biased here, of course, but we do have pretty good training. It's well-rounded. It does give you the business aspects as well as enough technology, and sometimes even too much technology to be able to build a good career on that.
Yeah.
Great question again. Thank you for that.
Great one.
From Mohammed, I just passed the Aviatric ACE exam. Congratulations, by the way. And yesterday, I'm planning for advanced networking. Any suggestions to be an architect?
Mohammed, learn architecture. Stop wasting your time on certifications. The certification is the name of a service and how to configure it. Mohammed, you need to learn how to sell. You need to learn system design. You need to be able to build a business case, know how to respond to an RFI, RFP, RFQ. You need to understand how to lead a team of 50 people, how to build a business case. None of that is going to be on these things. Now, I have no problem with you doing the AWS Advanced Networking. In fact, we're going to do a free boot camp on it coming soon. And I have 2 CCIEs and 1 CCNP teaching it. And who knows, I might actually bring in a 3rd CCIE to do it too, because I want you guys to actually learn networking. But these are engineering certifications. So you're going to need something on the business side. So I know where you're at. I know a course like ours is pretty challenging for you. Can you go to business school and get an MBA? That would help you far more. So the only certification out there that's actually architecture is a master's in business. Do you need a master's in business to get hired? The answer is no. We trained Daniel Bosu, this really cool guy from Togo. We also trained Richard Pesca from Togo, really great guy too. But Daniel Bosu didn't even graduate high school before JP Morgan Chase hired him, but he had the business knowledge. He could build a business case. He could sell. You should see this young guy because he was 20 years old, give a presentation. I always say he's the son I always wish I had because I think so highly of him. But, you know, kind of keep that in the back of your mind. You got to focus on the business, Mohammed. That's
I'll add this for Mohammed as well. Pivot. Now it's time to pivot.
Yep.
You have enough tech.
Yep.
And I really enjoy the Aviatrix platform. I
Me
think
too.
it does some very good things. The advanced networking, you can read the exam guide and decide how much of that is advanced. But in either case, is look at the technology that you're aware of right now and start asking yourself this question. And that's where the pivot, right? The mind shift happens. The technology that you do know, how would you apply it to a real business case? How would you apply it? Why, in what situation would you use a platform like Aviatrix? What benefit could it have to a customer? What problems does a customer need to have, the pain points, that this will be an applicable solution? Start changing your mind like that. Go online. We've discussed this before. Go online, find use cases. These vendors, they love to put use cases out there because these are marketing materials. In there, they'll explain why their solution is good for a particular problem, how they apply it in healthcare, how to apply it in retail, how to apply it in aviation, whatever it may be. Start looking at those type of things and start not focusing so much on, if I take this certification, I'm going to be a great architect.
Yeah.
Again, architect is not sitting there and knowing how to configure the technology. That's a CCIE, right? That's that type of exam. That's a AWS professional, right? Because you learn how to configure it. Now learn how to apply the knowledge, how to apply the technology to something that's going to be useful. Because people are going to pay you only to solve a problem with what you know. They're not going to pay you to learn something like that. I mean, it has no value to them. So find the problem, find how what you know solves that problem, and start pivoting into the business.
Yes, because now they're paying you for your guidance and your advice. How will this technology impact their business? Not how to do it. The closest certification out there to an architect certification, and it's only for technical architects, is the CCDE, the Cisco Certified Design Expert. And that is for a technical architect, meaning someone that designed networking solutions. But it's not going to be at the C-suite. It's not going to pay what an enterprise architect would be. And I got to tell you, Mohammed, I have a lot of respect for the CCIE. I did it. It was the worst 6 months of my life. I got to tell you, preparing for that thing. Cost me close to $40,000 in those days because we didn't have EBENG and network simulators like we do today. So it was $10,000 boot camps and renting routers for $400 a weekend for 6 months straight. It was miserable. But, you know, why does the CCIE still matter? Because after 20 some years, there's only 60,000 of them. And it's a barrier to entry. Mark, what did your CCIE cost you when you had the advantage of simulators and things like that?
Yeah, and so for me, it was a little cheaper because I didn't do any boot camps, right? So I took more time and did it on myself. So I spent a little less than $20,000 on it, a little less than $20,000. And that does not, of course, involve the actual room and board that I had to pay for and the certification itself. So that's just study material, equipment that I need, resources. So I personally thought I made out like a bandit on it compared to what other people spent.
You did. And you passed it. But that's why a CCI holds weight, because you can't find any. And, you know, you're looking for them. But Mohammed, you're very smart. You attend every free thing we have, and congratulations for doing so. I'm trying to give you as much as I can. Focus on the business. And see if there's an option for you to get some local, inexpensive business school education. That will get you what you need.
From Fala Shaki, in consultancy, why might an architect be required to stay on a project after the DevOps engineers have provisioned their architecture instead of joining another one?
Well, Fala Shaki, here's the process. I design it, I present it and sell it, and I go to a new customer. I am almost never involved. Now, once or twice I have been involved, and here's the reason why. I designed one architecture for a big bank, and it was closed, and there was a team that was building it. And the customer said, I don't feel good if Mike Gibbs leaves. So at the time I was living in Princeton, New Jersey, and I had moved into my vacation home in Palm Beach, and I didn't feel like going back. And I literally flew up once a week to be on site for 3 days to buy people lunches, drinks, and dinner, because it made the customer feel good. There was another time where I had moved on to an architecture. And as soon as I went in there, we brought in a team of really super smart engineers. Unfortunately, this team lacked emotional intelligence and angered the customer to the point where I got a phone call that said, Mike, the deal's going to fall through unless you can salvage the relationship. And I went in and I took people for good steak, good seafood, good wine, and good scotch, entertained clients for the next year while the people built it. But I was getting paid for my relationship management skills. I had nothing to do with the architecture. And while I was there, and I'm buying lunches and dinners and drinks and schmoozing and kissing babies and doing all the politics type thing, that I found the new architecture to design, present, and sell to them while I was there. And they did it. And why did they give me that architecture? And they told me, they said, Mike, if you and your company cares about us so much that when we don't like one of your engineers that's building it, you're going to come here every single day and take care of us, we know we need to give you guys more business. You're people that we can partner with. So kind of keep that. But in general, we're not there unless we're there for relationship management or unless we're looking for the next opportunity. Because in most cases, you're going to design an architecture and they're not going to be a big, giant transition architecture. You're not going to go from a data center that's got 100,000 servers or 50,000 servers, 100,000 virtual machines or something like that, or even less than that. And then all of a sudden move everything to the cloud in one fell swoop. You might be moving one thing and you got to get that up and running. And oh, wow, there's this new generative AI. Mike, bring in your team. And as soon as you do the generative AI, you know, Mike, we missed this data science opportunity to come back and do this. So it's constant. As you know, even interest rates will change the number of architectures you're doing back and forth. As interest rates go lower, companies are going to be more inclined to build a private cloud, which is cheaper and performs better and is more secure. As interest rates go higher, they'll be more likely to rent a solution on the cloud. So it's a constant state of flux, and that's great news because that means there's constant jobs for us anywhere, anytime.
So you would sum it up as customer experience, basically. That's what you're doing. You're building
Customer
further the relationship.
Or working on a new project or a new architecture, a new sales opportunity.
Yep, exactly. All right, Mike, can I twist your arm for one final question here? Yeah. Would that be possible? All right, let's go ahead, Tyrone, with that one. Okay, it's from Abel. When pivoting to a cloud architect role from a non-technical role, what are some of the most important attributes to highlight on your resume? And would you recommend certifications on top of Go Cloud Is there a second part of that, Tyrone? I assume it's just Go Cloud membership.
Yeah, so it's like I'll answer this, and we'll take the next
Okay,
two
good.
before we finish. So I want to make sure we get to everybody. So Abel,
enough.
here's the thing. In our program, we do recommend 3 certifications. We do. We recommend a cloud professional certification, such as the Azure Solutions Architect Expert or the AWS Solutions Architect Professional. We recommend one in the person's field. So if they wanted to be a cloud network architect, a CCNP or a CCIE. If they want to be a cloud security architect, we like a CISSP, and we also like a TOGAF. Now, we're telling you right now, that will not teach you architecture. And why do we do any interviews? Why do we do certifications at all? It's a pretty stamp on your resume that helps you get an interview. And then once you get that interview, it is up to you to go out there and get hired. And at some point in your career, you may be removing the certifications from your resume. Like my VP asked me to do at Cisco. They said, Mike, your certifications are making you look techie, not like an architect. Please get rid of them from my business card. So I did. So there's that. But what kind of things should you be on your resume? I don't know, responding to RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, delivering executive briefings, presenting to the C-suite, writing thought leadership documents, writing architectural documents, manage a team of engineers and specialty architects. Those kind of things are architect things, and they need to be there. So building business cases, that kind of thing, I'd want there. Those kind of things are there. Creation of statements of work is another architect thing. Now, here's the thing, Abel. Don't put it on your resume if you don't know what it is. Because if you, and I see this every day, people give me fake resumes. And the words aren't in context, and I can tell something's just a little off. And what I do when I interview people is I interview with them what's on their resume. And if somebody says they respond to an RFP, RFQ, I say, tell me about that last RFP. I'm looking for it, information. So make sure, and if you're in our program, you probably responded to some RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, but make sure that you can do anything that's on your resume. So I've interviewed 6,000 people, Abel, and 5,950 people have lied to me. Now, early in my career, the second somebody lied to me, I escorted them out of the room and said, thank you very much, you lied to me, interview's over. As I got older, I was coached by my management to basically thank them for their time, talk to them for 15 minutes politely, and generally be nice and say something like, come back when you have more experience, which is a proxy euphemism for I can't hire you, but I want to be nice about it. So it had nothing to do with their experience in the first place. So the key is those are the kind of things that need to be there. But make sure there's nothing on your resume where you can't answer expertly. It's like buying a product. If you brought a product and it said it could do this, and then you bring it in and it can't, not only are you returning that product, but you're angry at that company for even lying about their advertising. So your resume has to be truthful, it has to be honest, and you have to be able to talk about everything that's on your resume.
Yeah, and I'll add to this, depending on what role you want to go for. So if you want to go for a cloud architect role as it is currently advertised on the internetworks, meaning that you're going to be the more hands-on programming type kind of architect that is not really what an architect is supposed to be, then yes, go do the usual cloud certifications. Do that. Do some DevOps if that makes you happy. If you really want to go for an architect role, again, we're talking business. So you want to highlight those business attributes, those business skills, as Mike said. Then though, as I said previously, I would only recommend any type of cloud certifications well into your training cycle. And the reason I say so, if you come from a non-technical role, you have a leg up on somebody who's technical to begin with. Think of it this way, your cup, if you look at like your cup is not already full, meaning full of all these technical jargons, of these vendor-specific implementations, of what kind of solution. You're not full of that. What you're learning then, prior, is the actual technology. What is the technology? How can I use it? How does it work? Not what a vendor tells me.
No.
Once you go through those phases and you're well into it, and this is generally what we suggest too, ever before you go for certification. Then when you're ready to go take certification, when you hear these marketing terms like an elastic load balancer, or a compute engine, I forgot half these terms. But when you start hearing those, then it becomes easy. That's how you learn tech. Oh, talking about a virtual machine. Oh, just talking about a load balancer, right? Then it doesn't matter anymore what marketing terms they're throwing at you. That's the time when you do them, if they make you look good on your resume too, right? So don't just go for anything. Pick something that makes you look good at that time, which generally is going to be those professional level or higher certifications, if that's what you need. All right, let's go to the next question from Dingelman1. It says, hey, Mike, I'm learning a lot in my new role about managing clients. We also had to do an anti-corruption training. What are the limits when taking care of a client, and where should I draw a line?
Okay, Dingelman, this is a great question. Dingelman, it was an honor to work with you, and you're now probably the best technology company in the world, so I'm always happy to see you. So here's the thing. It's totally appropriate to take someone to dinner. It's totally appropriate to take them drinking. It's totally appropriate to have buy box seats to the Super Bowl and take them to the Super Bowl. It's totally appropriate to take them to a Katy Perry concert or a Taylor Swift concert if that's their thing. What's not appropriate is to say, if you give me the deal, I will give you $50,000. It's not appropriate to sleep with your clients. It's not appropriate to bribe your clients, and it's not appropriate to blackmail your clients. But it's good business to get to know your people, and it's good business to do these kind of things. So that's really what we're talking about. Not doing things. Now, in other parts of the world, you can't do anything without some of those things like bribes. I thankfully have never had to deal with that. I don't deal with that, but I can tell you people in certain parts of the world can't get anything done without bribes. But then they do things. But again, you don't need to do that. I know where you work. It's a great company, and I worked for the best companies, and I never needed to touch that either. People were just happy to work with me because I came from a company like Cisco, and it was like, okay, you're Cisco. We know what you guys can do. So keep that in the back of your mind. So that's really what we're talking about. Anything that you could tell your mother about, or your wife about, or your kids about that you wouldn't be embarrassed about, pretty much is okay to do. So I used my mother-in-law, my father-in-law. My father-in-law passed. He was the greatest man I've ever met. And I always say, could I tell my in-laws about it? And if the answer is yes, it's okay. And if the answer is no, I try to avoid it.
I agree 100%. Number one, don't do anything that's illegal.
Yeah.
Very plain and simple. I'm going to put this out there. I personally enjoy it. The first part of the Book of Solomon, Proverbs, read that. There's some wonderful business advice actually in there. You'd be quite surprised on how to deal with people, how to deal in business, how to keep your morals up. That would be a simple example. So again, don't do anything that's illegal. Don't do anything that you also don't feel comfortable with. Let's just put it that way. All right. Great question, though. Appreciate it. All right, question from Thinker's Dilemma. What is the best way to deal with laggard organizations that refuse to embrace code and insist on disparate low-code tools that make architecture very difficult?
Okay, Thinker's Dilemma, you're asking a tech question. So I'm going to ask you a different question. What makes you think they're a laggard organization? Is their top line revenue not high? Is their bottom line net income not high enough? Are they a market leader, or are they not a market leader? So you're talking about tech, which is just a tool. We're talking about business. There's a reason that organizations are spending more money on mainframes when the cloud providers are trying to get rid of them. And why is that? Because mainframes are highly efficient. They run highly efficient code. And a mainframe can process hundreds of thousands of transactions like nothing, where it would take giant servers to do it. So what is the business benefit? So the key when you want to sell a product is you have to show its impact on the business. So if you do use a different type of code, what's the benefit to the organization? How does that change the organization's business processes? What new features or functionalities does it enable the business? If the answer is it's just better tech that makes us better at tech, most businesses are going to say no, that doesn't make them a laggard organization, that makes them a smart business. 70% of actual technology projects fail, Thinker's Dilemma. 70%. And over 50% of all cloud architectures are disasters, meaning they do nothing for the business. So we can never think about why do we need a certain tech. We need to think about why do we need a specific business function. So what is the business benefit? Meaning, What is the vision for the business? After we understand the vision for the business, how does that business operate today? How does the sales process occur? How does the product get created? How is the customer support done? How is technical support done if appropriate? How does supply chain? How does that work today? And then we need to think about what types of technology then we need to think about how we want them to operate in the future, and then think about what types of technology. So if you've got a new coding solution that can help that business do a new business processes like sell more efficiently, show them and quantify that. By going to this new technology, we can increase sales by 1% because of the improved customer experience. That 1% of increased sales may equate to $200 million a year. Now your coding solution that costs $30 million is nothing. It's cheap. They don't care. They'll spend on it. But if you can't draw a line between your technology and your code versus in top line revenue or improved operational efficiency or decreased expenses or increased net income, it's not a technology product the company should do in the first place, regardless of how cool the technology. So I like to say there's no best technology. There isn't. What's the best technology? The one that makes the company's business performance. So we have to remember tech is just a tool. What's the best fuel to put in your car? Well, it depends. Are you racing that car? In which case you need a high compression engine with very high octane. Are you going to be driving that car for 800,000 miles? In which case you want something diesel. Do you need to use a small engine in the car because gas or petrol is $10 or $12 a gallon like it is in parts of Europe? If so, then you're going to need a small engine with a bunch of turbos. If you're in the US where gas is relatively cheap, we can have a big muscly V8 engine in our car and not care that it gets 15 miles a gallon. And we can enjoy the cool sound and have that really. So it's all what we're trying to do. So you've got to quantify it. We architects and those of us in pre-sales, we are not engineers. We can't have a bias towards technology. We can't be Mr. Serverless or Mrs. Serverless. We can't be low code or no code versus pro code. We have to be advocates for our customer and not a technology. So most of the time when I see this, it's because somebody loves the technology. And we can't love technology. We can't be biased. Imagine if you went to a doctor and every time you went in there, I have to give you this Pfizer drug. Why Pfizer drug? Because I love Pfizer drugs. Can you imagine? And Pfizer makes some great drugs, but they don't have the right drug for every medical condition. If we did that, patients would die. Now, if we looked and said, okay, my patient has hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol, which statin do I use? And I can look at atorvastatin made by Pfizer, which is a great one, versus Crestor. And I can say, okay, atorvastatin's cheaper, but it's not quite as effective on LDL suppression. But Crestor does this, but it's better at this and not this. Then I can make an informed decision. Same thing with tech. In many cases, the low code or no code is going to be better. And in other cases, the high code solution is going to be better. In some cases, serverless is going to be great. In other cases, serverless is going to cost too much money. But we don't know what to select until we know what problem we're trying to solve. So if you're thinking about tech, I'd start thinking about the business. Start thinking about what the executives care about. Start thinking about how you can quantify your tech to money and then build the business case and prove it. Look, I've sold plenty of billion-dollar architectures, and I got to tell you, nobody ever woke up and said, Mike, I just want to spend money. Help me spend it. In every process, we have to analyze the business goals, the business needs, the business pain points, the business challenges, and then we need to figure out what kind of technology solutions, whatever they may be. There was a hospital that we did a consulting project to that was looking at technology. And when we were there, we were noticing the nurses were running back and forth to an ice machine all day long. Each extra nurse was working an extra hour or 2 hours per day running back to the silly ice machine. We added a second ice machine, and all of a sudden the room was efficient. I was so excited about bringing them a tech solution. I was going to put RFID tags on all the wheelchairs and RFID pumps to help nurses find equipment, and the real problem was an ice machine. Imagine if I sold those RFID tags and all those other things, and it didn't solve the customer's problem. We never would have sold to that client again. So I hope I answered your question there. So at this point, I want to tell you about a couple of things. Right now, because we're celebrating 3 years of extreme success with the Cloud Architect Career Development Program, we're running a 50% special off of everything in our store. Please take advantage of it. Tomorrow, by the way, we have a completely free How to Get Your First Cloud Architect Job webinar. We'll come in, it'll be on Zoom, we can talk, have a face-to-face conversation, we'll go over the cloud architect role, we'll go over the cloud architect skills, we'll talk about how to bypass HR so you don't get auto-rejected. It'll be a fun time and a very informative time, and we'll tell you everything that you need to learn. And guess what? We'll spend about 90 minutes on Zoom answering your questions. We can practice interview, we can assess you, anything you need to help you get to your goals, and it's all free. And while we're at it, we have a completely free document to assist you in building your career on how to get your first cloud architect job, all free from Go Cloud Careers. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to spend the afternoon with us. I enjoyed spending time with you. I know Mark loves providing tech career advice, and I look forward to seeing you when we get back. We're all excited, Mark and I, about the conference. You know, we have our annual Go Cloud Careers conference. We're going to see our students in person, and I can't wait to see it. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone.